Hello lovelies, and welcome back to another episode from Halcyon Heights. Today we are starting another major project, Lake Odaxeda, the namesake for Odaxedale. And where will this lake be? Well, let me show you. Over here on the eastern side of the kingdom, you may remember we have this huge slash in the landscape from the natural generation. It took me quite a while to figure out exactly what I wanted to do to fill this in. Initially, I thought I might have a grand bridge going across from the cherry grove to the mountain as a way for the nobles to access the castle, as shown by the tough outlines here. But I could never come up with a good bridge design, so I abandoned that idea, but have yet to take down the tough, and came up with the ambitious plan to put in a 3-tiered lake with glass waterfalls connecting them. Yup, a 3-tiered lake with glass waterfalls. So, a while ago, I laid out an initial outline for where the lakes would be, and today we start work on it. The first thing we need to do is decide on the depth of each lake and fill in the slash in the landscape at that level. This turned out to be fairly easy for the bottom and top lakes, but the transition from the top to middle lake certainly gave me some trouble. I think the main reason for this was that due to the outline that I had originally placed, my mind was convinced that the middle lake extended underneath the upper one, and therefore I could not figure out how to close in the large gaping hole correctly. However, once I modified the outline for the lakes and terraformed the surrounding land a bit, the extent of the middle lake began to take shape within the landscape, and it was much easier to close up the remaining gap. That took me a lot longer than I first anticipated. I started this process on stream thinking that I could finish it by the end. And by finish, I mean 100% done. Filling in lake shores, waterfalls, and landscaping. Yeah, no. Just this took me almost 5 hours, and all we have finished are the initial lake beds. Why do I always underestimate how long a project will take? Oh well, I guess we get back to it. But first, let's take care of this riffraff. Hey, it's not finished yet. You don't need to inspect it yet. Okay, now let's get back to it. The next step, now that we have the lake beds defined, is to swap out the dirt for our shoreline material. Unlike the other water features that we have built on the base, this one also needs to incorporate cliffs that lead from one lake to the next, for which I borrowed the cliff block palette from the grand entryway. With the first cliff finished, I decided to move on to the shoreline of the middle lake, but soon found I was not liking what I was doing, So I switched gears and installed the mud lake beds. Still feeling uninspired by the lake shores, I then moved on to some landscaping and terraforming around the lake to help make it fit into the landscape. We really need to finally build the forever homes for our librarians, Fletchers, and the animals because they are definitely hampering our beautification efforts. Eventually, I was able to return to working on the lake shores, but decided to complete the upper and lower lakes first. Something about the middle lake was just not doing it for me creatively, and that's okay. Oh hi! Sorry to drag you away from the time lapses. In all seriousness, I don't like having so many time lapses in a video, but honestly I don't see any other way to condense the progress of this project into something manageable without just cutting from hey, I'm going to do this to hey, look, it's done. So, be prepared for more time lapses. But first, now that we have finished this bottom lake, let's fill it with water. We will have to do more landscaping around the lake, but I think that will wait a bit until we have figured out exactly how the surroundings will tie into the lake area. Let's start here on the bottom layer and work our way up to make sure we have no flowing water. Filling in water can be so satisfying when you get to the point that the central areas just autofill, but I will admit, with all the crevices and such that I introduced in the shorelines, sometimes finding the right spot to place the water was a bit tricky. But we got there in the end, and voila! Our first lake is more or less finished. Now I guess I have no choice but to finally finish the shoreline of the middle lake. Funny how I started with that one initially, and now it is the last part to be completed before we turn to the waterfalls. I guess that's how it goes sometimes. Okay, so I didn't get back to the middle lake right away and rather did a bit more landscaping, but once I finally got back to it, it didn't take too long and it came together a lot better than when I had initially started working on. Finally, we have finished the shorelines of all the lakes. But before we can fill the water into the other lakes, we need to build our waterfalls. In case I have not been clear up to this point, there will be one waterfall here, leading from the middle lake to the lower lake, and a second one up here, leading from the upper lake to the middle lake. I have to admit I have been kind of putting this off because I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing, but I guess we'll figure things out as we go. My vision for these waterfalls is for them to look like the white, tumultuous water you see streaming down the side of a cliff, where the whiteness is an indication of the turbulence in the flow, kinda like what the water flowing over Niagara Falls looks like, or in a large fast mountain waterfall. So I'm starting by using white and gray glass to try to get that effect and give it some depth. So as you can see behind me, we have made some progress on the first waterfall. It's not really looking how I want yet, but we have a bigger problem that we need to deal with first. We come up here to the upper lake, you can see that I started to put in the water. I wanted to know how high the water would be in this lake for the start of the waterfall, and as you can see, it is actually pretty shallow. Then I started to fill in from the sides at the level that I would like the lake to come to, and well, the water physics is making it look absolutely atrocious. This obviously came about because I have sloped the lake bed downward. We could just raise it up, but since we have all the other aspects already done, like the shoreline and such, I don't really want to tear it all out. So I've been trying to think of alternative ways to fix this. One thought is to maybe use ice or blue wool to have this lake be frozen and then have it thaw closer to the waterfall, but that doesn't really make any sense physically and would probably look even worse. So after much contemplation and a lot of staring at the landscape, I decided to split this lake into two, with an upper section that flows into the lower part via a couple smaller waterfalls. Just like with the original shaping of the lakes themselves, I had a bit of trouble reshaping the new upper lake so that it didn't just abruptly stop at the new cliff edge. But eventually we figured it out, and I really like the addition of the cherry tree in the middle of the lake. With that problem solved, I went back to working on the waterfalls and determined that in order to get the look that I was going for, using glass alone was not going to cut it. So I grabbed some white wool and instantly it was 100% better. One issue that I had on both of the bigger waterfalls was getting the width correct. A lot of the time I would extend it out past what physically made sense or looked good. My remedy to this was to bring in vegetation on each side to kind of contain where the water would flow. I found that the contrast in the green leaves against the white water of the waterfall really seemed to tie things together. We also added some hidden lights in behind the two bigger waterfalls, and the glowing effect of the waterfall at night is just spectacular. And just like that, Lake Odaxeda is done. What started out as an idea for a 3-tiered lake with 2 waterfalls turned into a 4-tiered lake with 4 waterfalls, and I think it looks fantastic. There is actually a lot that still needs to be done landscaping wise, but I'm waiting for 1.21.5 to come to the server so that I can use some of the new detail blocks. Also, as I mentioned earlier, some of the landscaping will also depend on how the surrounding area is built up, so it will evolve slowly over time. But let's take a closer look. First, there are several vantage points that give fantastic views of the lake and waterfalls. I particularly like this one as we come around the back of the cathedral, and the ones from the mountainside that encompass the full extent of the lakes are also particularly stunning. One thing that is not stunning though are these 2 tough bridges that were from our previous ideas. So let's get rid of these once and for all. Ah, much better. Now we can actually enjoy the view from here. And here is where we're gonna have to leave it. What do you think of the result? Any suggestions for what I could add? Let me know in the comments. And as always, stay floofy, my friends, and I will see you sometime in the future. Bye!